Hey everyone, Yan Zhao back again tonight. Special guest. But quickly, before we get started, tomorrow night I have the basic expert talking about his newest OSE module. So this is the guy who did the Aztec sort of D&D-S supplement MacWeedle. And we'll check him out tomorrow night, early show, 6 o'clock. But today, I have the one, the only, never duplicated Narwhal.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hey, I got to ask you, have you ever seen the Seinfeld episode with Donna Chang? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've seen a few over the years, but I was one of those few people who never got into Seinfeld.
Okay. Well, the joke it's that Jerry goes on a blind date with Donna Chang, and he's really excited to be dating an Asian woman, but then she's white when he gets there, and he feels ripped off. Like that's like what happened with because I was like, who is Jan? And so I click on it, and I was like, oh, he looks kind of like a genius white guy. That was something that your boy Zach was saying recently in one of his videos. He's like, if you want to know the future, you need to find a bald, middle-aged white man and listen to what he has to say. And then in your interview, you're like talking about basic. I'm like, dude, it's accurate. That's hilarious.
And yet, your boy Zach never answers my emails. But
yeah, hopefully, well, he and I are buddies, so maybe the connection will be made at some point. Who knows?
Yeah, I had someone on a couple years ago. The first time I had met him, and they saw me backstage, and they're like, "Wait, am I being punked? Is this a real video?" And I'm like, "Well, I have all these other interviews. You can go check those out." But
nice.
But first time, it's been I've actually wanted to have you on for a few years, but I kind of didn't know where to go with it. Your stuff is so unusual, especially in terms of the comic world, because usually you have people who grew up like in the 70s and the 80s. They have like this John Byrne DC Marvel house style, or you go like way on the other end, where it's like absolutely cartoony and probably a bit perverted, fits the cat, Omaha, the cat dancer type of thing. It's really hard to pin your style down. Just from an artistic style, who are your influences?
Yeah, good question. It's definitely, as you're talking, I was like, that's true. And the fact my influences are kind of weird is probably the reason. It helps give you like the little bit of outsider kind of coming into it or whatever. But for within comics, I was obsessed with Tim Sale, kind of pretty from when I got into comics really my senior year of high school, and it was pretty much with I read like a lot of Frank Miller and Alan Moore because I just like read the classics that everyone talks about, and that kind of got me into it. But then I got into Tim Sale, read like pretty much everything of his I could find, and he has that thin ink line with the lots of black color holds or spot blacks that look really sweet. So that's kind of a big influence. And then the other big influence is French comics and like specifically Bengal is like awesome. And then Bangus, who is Korean, but that's Capcom. So if the Marvel versus Capcom like style, I just love that so much. And that's kind of my favorite. And that's funny too, because it's a little bit hard to find. It's like, I'm like, how come there aren't more comics that are just like that style? But there kind of aren't even. And a lot of those really awesome artists, like I don't think Bengus ever drew manga or comics, I'm pretty sure. But some of that company, it's like Udon Entertainment. It's a little bit of a house style with them, but it's like Akimon and Bengus are the two best. And they have some of the legendary art where you'll see it from like the 90s and you're like, oh, that's great. And they're just like the best, I think. So
yeah, and how did you do? Well, I'm gonna guess like Bangus you discovered through Marvel versus Capcom, or how did you discover them?
I think, yeah, Marvel vs. Capcom, and then also kind of through Bengal a little bit somehow. It's like it's all like swirls around. And I think there's, by the way, Fresher Luke in the chat, what's up, man? How's it going? And but there's it's like the East and the American is like
Mhm.
these two manga and American comics. Like Europe is like right in the middle, and it even feels in the middle, like influence wise. Like it kind of feels like manga without huge eyes is like what a lot of like
Kind of.
European art feels like, which I really like. So because I remember thinking that as a kid, I was like, I like everything about anime. I just wish their eyes weren't so big. That's like me at like 15 years old or something. Then you discover European art, and you're like, oh, it's like quite close to what I was thinking. So
Yeah, that's the one unfortunate thing about once you get like such a specific style like manga. Um, it's cool that their own sort of style develops, but then like you can't break that mold.
yeah. Yeah, you know what I've seen too that's weird, but it works. This works both ways, I'm pretty sure. But you'll once in a while you'll see a manga artist and they're like amazing and they're some of the best in the world. But you'll see them try to draw American style and it will look kind of bad. And you're like, what are you doing? And then kind of vice versa for Americans trying to draw manga. It just goes,
Yeah.
what is
Yeah.
that? It's like it's cursed. What is this abomination?
Yeah, I think, that's a real interesting question. I lived in Tokyo for 2.5 years, and I was doing design over there. And I think a lot of it is there's kind of like cultural misunderstandings. Like you would use, I don't know, like, if in English you said like, I'm going to kick your ass. If you said that in Japanese, like, it'd be like, what? Why would you kick my butt? What? Like
Yeah,
it wouldn't make sense. And so I
yeah,
think, like, especially with a lot of Americans who are drawing manga, for me, it feels like the bones are kind of there, but it's missing some of the cultural relevance that makes manga work,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
Well, and there's like shorthands, yeah, like, and I
Yeah.
don't know, yeah, actually, because I was gonna say like at first I was like gonna say maybe they get the bones wrong, but I think you're right, they can get that right, but then it gets to like these, but like the shorthand for like what various like when their eyes will become upside down half moons and their
Yeah.
mouth
Yeah.
becomes a square, like, and that's them, it's them sort of being angry, but like funny angry or whatever. Like that's stuff that's hard to like. You have to read a ton of manga and just immerse yourself to pick that kind of stuff up. And I feel like that stuff. It's funny because it like really works. It's really great, and I think that might have taken decades for that culture to like perfect that shorthand. Kind of.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and it's all been after World War II as well.
Yeah,
So you are not only the artist, but you are also a writer. And I kind of had some questions about that because you you seem to really be into a lot of different media. So you just put a video on X about interactivity in stories, and so you're analyzing films there. You've got comics, of course. I've seen you do other things about stories, like more novel prose type stories. What is it about comics that made you say, I want to make those? Because you could have gone into any of these other mediums.
yeah. Well, so I kind of originally was obsessed with movies, and I was working towards trying to kind of break into that. And but kind of part of the plan to break into that was like get good at drawing and writing was like there, and then an appreciation for comics growing, and then ultimately it's like, well, to make a movie you need like an army of people and $1 million or whatever, and then to make a comic you need just yourself and a pen and a piece of paper, like, which is kind of romantic, is kind of awesome. So I do appreciate that, and I do appreciate like how comics are like it literally is just combining words and pictures. That's like really
Hmm.
fun. And the examples of the best comics, they can beat like any of the other mediums, but it can be kind of rare maybe where that happens. But like I think Berserk really like hit me hard when I was reading it. And like I think that more than like any TV show or movie I've ever seen, that hit me, or book I've read. But some things could almost tie. The best is always great. But I still dabble in like animation,
Mhm.
and I'm sort of dabbling in film. The thing I like about film is I like the approach that it forces you. Writing wise, it's different. It puts limitations on you. Where with comics, you can write anything, and you could write like two giant robots fighting or whatever. But if I'm writing a film and I want to try and make it myself, it literally has to be like two people in a room talking. So that helped me so much to figure out like how do you make that not boring. And that was almost like my conclusion was like interactivity is like how you can
Mhm.
make two people talking not be boring. And there's some other things I'm trying to figure out as I go. But so eventually I want to make some like low budget short films and just
Hmm.
dabble, but not super seriously the way comics is kind of I've been making a living the past few years doing comics, but I don't know if film would ever get there, but I just want to continue down that path here and there really.
Interesting. Uh, would you want to do more like straight film or animation?
Well, like actually kind of like both, but I really want to try and do straight film. I actually it came up with animation actually was a few years ago I did a little Earthbound animated short,
Mhm.
and that was the first time I'd worked with voice actors, which are they're just straight up like actors. The experience of working with them and paying them and everything, and so you're on an hourly schedule, so
Uh-huh.
you got to be prepared, fast, ready. But I did have a funny experience where they came in and they did the first line reading, and it for just that alone made me so self-conscious about what I had written, and then that feeling was very beneficial because I'm like, ooh, like I feel like that's like such a good step is like get super self-conscious because it'll kind of force you to be a little more of a perfectionist or whatever, or it'll make you suddenly all the warts or whatever you see it immediately and you're like, ah, but it totally helps you like grow as a writer. And but they did a reading and it wasn't the greatest, and I was like, oh, I'm wasting my money, I don't know. But then I was like, no, 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 no. So I kind of gave them like some context for the scene and what's going on and what the character's feeling. They did another take and it was perfect, and I was like, actors are so awesome. I like, and that process of all you got to do like that demystified it for me a little bit, where it's like, okay, all you got to do, well, if it's a film, you still got to get them all in one place at the right time, and they got to be kind of professional, have everything memorized or whatever. But
Mhm.
all you got to do is give them the context, and then they do their job. And that alone was like fun. But seeing the art form of acting is like really fun to see what they bring to it. And they'll do readings that sound great in ways you wouldn't have perceived, or bring other angles to the character you wouldn't have thought out about that are awesome. So that I kind of have really got bit by that bug a little bit, and I like that aspect of filmmaking.
Ah, so normally you're sort of like a one-man band in the comics, and it's just sort of like you and everything that you bring to the character. How does did it change at all the way you write your characters once you had those other people sort of bringing their own um, thoughts into how uh, how the voice actors, they bring something different into those characters that sort of change the way that after that you write your characters, or pretty much the same, you just like shift a little for if you're going to do
Yeah, it's usually pretty
animation.
similar. I'm trying to think of an example where it would totally change things quite a bit. But it's like they'll bring flourishes and details, and then even seeing that can like help you going forward. If you're just writing something from scratch, it can kind of because they'll zoom in so much to it, that approach even helps kind of thinking of it from
Hmm,
that perspective.
interesting. So a lot of people have, especially in the last, let's say, 20 years, have really used comics as like a jumping off point to go into film, video, and whatnot, video games. Um, do you think eventually you want to totally make that transition, or do you think you always have one foot in the comic world?
I want to say it always would be one foot. I definitely want to transition. I want to make more money, and that's kind of the unfortunate truth. Is like all the
Yeah,
money is in the other stuff, and that
yeah.
there is like they have a little bit of a retention problem because a lot of the best artists do kind of find their way out of comics, and writers too into other industries. But like even like Mark Millar, like he's almost like a role model of like he keeps doing comics even though he totally doesn't have to. He has FU money and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I can kind of see it like that. I have a fair amount like ahead written already, like at least like 5 years of content is like written,
Oh, wow.
maybe more. So just that alone, I have to keep drawing. If I ever get more success, what I like to do is if it's a little surplus, I sink it back into comics and get someone else illustrating where I'm just writing. And really, I've only done that here and there, but a big one was Cerberus with Monica McCagney drawing it. And
Oh,
we're working on part 2 right now. And that is turning out great. And that's a lot of fun. And that's been cool because that's like my art can be divisive and some people won't jump in, won't take the
sure.
plunge. So having that kind of extra awesome commercial art of Monica McCagney that is bringing in new readers to that then they think of me more as a writer almost, which that helps too. Because that sometimes I don't know if this is I'm experiencing ever so slightly that it's like a pigeonholing almost there where people don't think of me as a writer, and I think that could help my career more almost if I was thought of more as a writer, but they just don't. So then I'm like, just so you know, I'm just a writer too, or whatever. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I never really thought of that in terms of the comic world, but that makes a lot of sense of pigeonholing, especially on the visual side, since comics is primarily a visual medium. Like that's what people think of first.
Yeah,
But yeah, now that you mention it, I guess you sort of have to write a lot of things that other people illustrate before sort of like the mentality switches.
yeah. If I could do it again, I would almost flirt with the idea of having 2 pen names, one for my art and one for my writing, and see what that does, if that like helps or something.
Oh, that'd be interesting, but it would make it hard to promote the book.
Yeah, and I would
You,
get really tired. I'd be like from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. Or yeah, I'm the writer and then I'm the artist. I don't know.
unless you pretended to be your own twin brother or something.
Yeah, or like my own Siamese twin. I could just like have a fake head right here.
Exactly. So speaking of books, you currently have Earthbound Grand Prix Part 2 up on Fund My Comic. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about Earthbound and how we got to the Grand Prix Part 2?
Yeah, so Earthbound was like my first book, and it goes lucky enough to kind of get a response pretty much right away. The famous legend is your boy Zach kind of gave it a glowing review after I fulfilled the first campaign, which wasn't a crazy big campaign, but Comicsgate had kind of been a thing and it had gotten out there, which is awesome. And it sold out overnight though from that, and then that was like kind of blew my mind. And then I quit my day job, which was at the time at Fred Meyer Deli in Portland. And since then I've been like full-time comics. It's been up and down roller coaster, but it's been great. But yeah, so Earthbound though, sci-fi, kind of like it was based on an old movie script I had written, and then when I turned 30 I was like, I want to make a big book. I'm like, this. So I looked at what I'd written. I was like, this is the best thing this could be. And it was the most latest thing I'd written too. I was like, this could be a good comic. So I was like, you know what? Eff it. I'm just going to go for it. And that Eff it energy kind of helped and kind of paid off a little bit too. But yeah, it's all about 2 mercenaries coming to Earth to recruit contenders for the Grand Prix tournament. And there was a competition between them. They kind of have 5 targets, and whoever recruits the best of 5. So if you get 3 of 5, then you go free, and then your person you're competing against will stay enslaved. So it kind of plays with this space slavery kind of idea, mercenary type stuff. And the Grand Prix is like all in the background, but there's nothing really about it other than it's this fighting tournament in space. So I always knew the sequel would be about the fighting tournament in space. But I kind of knew some things. I'm like, I don't want it to be just a following a tournament and a bunch of scenes of people fighting. So I kind of had the early idea to kind of loosely construct it around the plot similar to Enter the Dragon, which is like a
Mhm.
fighter goes undercover into a fighting tournament and trying to figure something else out, kind of clandestine. So that was the idea, and it kind of just grew from there. And that's like what Grand Prix explores. It's released in a slightly different format because Earthbound was released in 2 trades, never released as floppies really. But this one is getting released as floppies. They're double issues, and
Oh,
there's going to be 6 of them. So it's similar length. Each story is like about like a feature film. They're kind of like a feature film script is like what it gets converted from basically.
okay.
And yeah,
So
so this one will
90 to 120 pages ish.
yeah, and that's the script, but then the actual comics,
Mhm.
my rule of thumb has always been it just doubles. So like the comics are about 250 to 300 pages, the full
Wow.
stories, and then yeah, the scripts are like 120 around there.
Man, that's impressive. How long does it normally take you to make a book?
To do like one trade takes like about a year, sort of, and that's kind of with kind of doing other stuff. So yeah, like 150 or so pages a year, and that's kind of with my style being kind of fast and sort of minimalist, kind of allows a little bit for that. And I always feel like I could do more. Like I can sort of draw a page a day almost if I'm real focused, but there's a million things that come up, and then you're fulfilling and you're emailing and you're doing other stuff, collaborations and so just the way life goes, it's like about one trade a year that I can do. So that'd be like 3 issues of Grand Prix can kind of be done in a year, um, or one trade. And then I have like the collaborations with your boy Zach.
Mhm.
So those are some of the bigger projects I'm working on as well.
Nice. Um, all right. So, I had a question about the colors too. Who are your influences for colors?
Yeah, good question. It's like animation in general. And one thing that I do think of as like an influence is that animation is like collage where they do
Mhm.
paintings for the backgrounds and then the characters are cell paintings. So the characters for 2D, the characters look flat and then the backgrounds look like kind of 3D textured or whatever. So
Mhm.
I've kind of always found ways to try and do that. The latest that I do for like this for the whole Grand Prix series is I use Blender to make low poly backgrounds, and then I
Oh.
color the characters over the top. And then that's kind of fun because it's like being a filmmaker too, because you go in with the virtual camera and you're picking the lens and the camera angles and everything and combining it with the layouts of how big the panel should be. Like all that stuff is like pretty fun. But then the Blender, there's still kind of like some color theory to it to get everything looking good. But once those backgrounds are there, I'm kind of like making sure the characters match that. And that can even mean a lot of times if I'll kind of use key colors. So if I'm like Julia's dress is blue and her skin is
Mhm.
like tan, I just color her and then I'll throw the orange soft light on top of her lighting. And then that makes her sink into the drawing better. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell too.
Okay. I was wondering. I used to do comic reviews on the channel, and the number one thing, just about every issue I'd review, I'd bitch about the colors, because most modern coloring is terrible. But again, I would say this is non-standard. Like, I don't really see anybody else coloring like this. But yeah, all the theory works. Like, all the characters who need to pop out, pop out. Everything that it needs to look like the background, it looks like the background. So it really had me curious, like how you came on this style, because it works, even though it's not what sort of the safe coloring style or the mainstream would necessarily do.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the mainstream has kind of like an airbrushy terribleness. I don't know but if that's what you're thinking of, but um
Well, it's not like that. Like, I've told this story before, but like, people want to color things, the things that they're colored. So like, I was looking over a campaign a few years ago, and it was like it was a forest scene, and there was a little patch of blue sky, like the most intense royal blue you've ever seen,
Oh yeah,
with like a Photoshop clouds filter over it. And then the trees were all green and the tree trunks were brown. And then there
yeah,
was more brown for the dirt. And the two characters were fighting and they were both wearing brown. So it was really, and it was all like the same kind of brown. So it was really hard to see. And then, like, after 5 minutes of looking at this picture, I realized there was a third character in there that I just hadn't seen. Um, and that's sort of what I see, n- not even just in indies, but I see that at the big two these days. And it's so nice to see like something where my eye knows where to go. I can tell one character from another. It's like it's not, grass is green, therefore I'm coloring it green. You know what I mean?
yeah. That's a good point. That would almost be like something you could tell someone who's just learning. That's why it's unfortunate. It feels a little basic, and some colorists don't know it yet. But that would almost be like the first lesson is like green doesn't mean green. Kind of like if you're thinking grass is green, that does not mean it needs to be green. Like, um,
Yes.
and what helped me a lot was way back in the day, I did watch on YouTube of all places just a great video on color theory. The channel
Oh,
was Sikra Draws. If people know that channel, even it's
oh,
like
yeah.
relatively big. And he had just an awesome video on color theory. So I watched that. My coloring improved overnight, and just since then, I've kind of had a little bit more of a sense of that, of how you're trying to get it all to kind of balance and feel like one environment kind of thing.
Nice. When you're doing it, how do you tend to use the color in terms of like shaping the mood or the feel of a story?
Yeah, one thing I remember thinking is if I'm changing environments, I at least especially with the 3D, I want the whole room to feel different. So for this is like the Grand Prix main hall. It's like very orangey, kind of like golden kind of thing. And then if I go somewhere else, it will definitely be different. And then once I know it's orangey and golden, I'm actually coloring the characters. Their base color is usually like gray, like a neutral dark 50% gray or something. So they kind of
Mhm.
sink in value wise, and then I'm getting the colors that kind of work within that, um, and getting it all to kind of till it looks good. And the what's nice a little bit about like Clip Studio is it's okay if you get it wrong, you just kind of adjust it until it looks a little better. And I think that's another color theory thing they say is like getting the value is the most important even. So like you can
Yeah.
actually kind of get the wrong quote unquote color, like hue or whatever. But if you get the value just right, it will still look pretty good. So I do a lot of I have it on my shortcut. It's Control B, and that's my brightness and contrast, and I'll slide that up and down until it clicks, and then I'll leave it there. And even getting that, um, then you can mess with the color more from there if you need to or whatever. But
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have noticed that the color in your books, uh, as well as the art, is something that really kind of, for me, sets it apart from a lot of the other books. Whereas like color is sort of an afterthought, like, I guess I got to throw this in here, or nobody will buy it, type of thing.
mhm.
Whereas like here, it actually looks planned out.
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, I remember that too. When I started drawing digitally, my idea was I wasn't going to do crazy line thickness stuff, inking and or even much ink black spots, or what do they call it? Just huge
Mhm.
black. And so I was like, okay, that means it's going to be the color's job to kind of define the shapes more than the lines. Really, the lines just hold the colors, and that was partly for speed because that was my first like and only kind of real job in the comic industry. I was kind of under the gun, so I kind of tried to design the style from the ground up to be able to do it relatively fast. And I
Mhm.
remember thinking like, well, if you're like cross hatching and then also painting tones on the flats, that's redundant. Like you should pick one or the other. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do lines, just hold the colors, and I can do the shapes kind of with the colors then.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and I can see the time saving method. I'm just thinking about like this book compared to like most of what Marvel does. In yours, the colors make the image look alive, Whereas like most of the stuff I see now in Marvel, they don't want to pay for good inkers anymore. So they all look like coloring books
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
like
If it
airbrushed
has,
Photoshop.
yeah, that's almost like the worst of both worlds because my art can get accused of the coloring book thing, but I try to avoid it. And if you keep like, yeah, if it has good coloring and if it has the lively gestures, then
Mhm.
people tend to, if it vibes with them, if they like it, then that is, then they're in at that point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, that is sort of the thing about the style. I think it's so out of the what people see the most time these days that you know I can see why people would not like it, but the one thing I don't think you can say is that it's poorly done. Like, if you look at the big two, they're hiring people where I have to question the technical skills, and there's a difference between not being able to make things better and then using this as a choice for how you want to tell your story. Um, so
Yeah,
for me, it works, but even if
that's
someone didn't like it, you couldn't say like it's poorly done.
yeah, yeah. And I remember a line I had back in the day that I still think it's kind of true, but it's kind of this idea that if it's a comic, you're talking about like 100 pages, maybe. That's like a little different than like looking at one page. So one page of like this style, like whatever, but 100 pages, it can kind of hypnotize you almost. And like that's
Yeah.
some feedback I'll get is that people that it grows on them and they appreciate that experience with the book to like have an art style grow on you.
Yeah. It's almost like you fall into the book, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. What's up, Anto? I think Anto's a buddy too.
Ah. And so speaking of that, so you made a video, I think you posted it yesterday, about having interactivity with the audience. And you mostly focused on movies. And I forget the name of the Marlon Brando Western that you used. But how would you say you develop that same kind of interactivity in your comics?
Yeah, good question. I'm trying to remember when because I was thinking that kind of idea a while back, even in like my 20s when I was screenwriting and stuff. I was even thinking the term interactivity. I was like, interactivity, like a novel can be interactive, a movie can be interactive. Uh, and then it kind of clicked because I was reading an interview with um, Hitchcock, and it was Francois
Mhm.
Truffaut interviewing him. And apparently, the French love Hitchcock, and I didn't really know that, and that's a kind of famous interview. It's this big, thick book, and the reason I found that is because I had bought manga in Theory and Practice, which is from the guy who did JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and he
Oh,
said all he read was that book that really got him going was that interview. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Just an interview that's supposedly, and that interview definitely hinted at all this interactivity stuff specifically. And for me, it was like confirming it a little bit. I was like, oh, I have been thinking this and they're saying it too. And that's when I wrote like the kind of long essay breaking it down for me, but I published it, quote unquote. And it actually sold like pretty well for me. Like it sold over 1,000 copies. A lot of people have
hmm.
read it. And that video released kind of with it. It's been out for since a while, but putting it out on Twitter, it got a whole new eyes. More people are talking about it, which is fun. But what Truffaut said is he called it, they were talking kind of about suspense and stuff like that. And Truffaut called it the laws of audience participation. And that helped me click for me too a lot. And it's like, it's just all about building up the context. And you can think of like a million examples and they can be pretty simple. But like, I think there's one that I've thought of and it might not be even be in the book or the thing, but it's like, if a mom is like yelling at her daughter, like, you need to get a job, and then it cuts and the daughter's walking down the street and then she sees a help wanted sign, that is like interactivity because the audience will be like, like she's wondering, she's debating whether or not to go in. Whereas if you didn't have that scene beforehand, there would be nothing there. And so you're always just trying to build up the ability of the audience to have these thoughts to be able to know what's going on in the character's head, and it kind of helps you order the story. And then with that, it's a lot of it's like a question of, do you want suspense, do you want mystery or do you want paranoia, which is like kind of a mix of both a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Paranoia is kind of you could say it's the hardest and the funnest, maybe. I don't know. But I do have kind of I've liked paranoia a lot whenever since I started really trying to figure everything out. I was like, paranoia is kind of fun. But another quick example of that is the show Columbo. Have you seen that show?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so that's a classic. Everyone loves it. I love it too. I saw it late in life, like it was only a few years ago, but I've seen every episode now, and
Wow.
it's so great. But that one, the whole show is built on the idea of dramatic irony, which is basically like suspense. They're like identical as far as like what they are. It's just I guess one's more horror-ish and one's more like comedic almost. But
Hmm.
but the idea that you know who the killer is the whole time. So when Columbo's talking to them and they're lying to him, we know they're lying, and then we're kind of wondering when Columbo's going to pick up on it. That gives us like the higher plane, that suspenseful dramatic irony point of view. Usually mysteries are the opposite. You don't know who the killer is, and then your
Yeah.
point of view aligns identically with the detective. So our point of view actually doesn't like align with Columbo. But that's just the way they do it. It's funny they do it the opposite the way you might think, and it totally works for what that show is.
Hmm. And so how do you well so in terms of comics, one major difference or can be a difference in comics as opposed to like film or TV is that you have thought bubbles. So you can give people the inner monologue um, of what exactly your character's thinking. Does that affect the way that you write it all, or screw the thought bubble, or how do you
I
think of
haven't I haven't been doing it, but I kind of want to a little bit. It depends on I got to think of a project specifically, I guess, and make a point. Because when I first got into it, I was avoiding it because I trying to be more like movies. That's kind of like what the whole industry has kind of been going in that
it? Mhm.
direction. But I did notice. I read the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin
Oh.
Tarantino,
Mhm.
and he puts people's thoughts in that book, which aren't in the movie. And I noticed how he does it is like so I feel like it's like a rule of thumb sort of is like the thought it has to be just as good or better than a great line of dialogue. So it's almost
Mhm.
it is what people think but then choose not to say. So a lot of times it's like awesome. It's like super truthful where they don't want to hurt someone's feelings, so they're not actually saying it, but they're being like brutally honest or whatever, and it makes for like hilarious lines, and the thoughts are better than the dialogue almost in that book. And he does it kind of sparsely, but totally works. So I was like, that would be how I would try and do it if I did it in a comic,
Hmm.
kind of rule.
Why do you think the industry's gone away from thought bubbles?
I think it's because they all want to like be movies, kind of, which is
Oh.
like a little unfortunate. And then I heard one other argument for thought bubbles, which I'm a little less familiar with, but people were saying Peter Parker needs his thought bubbles. Twitless said that, and it's like, yeah, it's iconic getting to know his inner monologue is like so fun, and when you take that away, it's a little bit lame too. But I guess sometimes you know
Yeah,
what they'll
yeah.
do is they'll it's like a soft transition, or they'll use narration boxes instead of thought bubbles, and that you could still get kind of some of that fun that way. But that's even a little different in itself too.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking back to, like, old, Chris Claremont X-Men with, Kitty Pryde always had thought bubbles, and it was the way, that we could really know she's super awkward, in this
Yeah,
position with all the other adults.
yeah. Yeah, it feels like it works perfect for comics, and it is funny that it's like out of favor. It could be something that someone could bring back and really uh, make a splash with if someone took it and ran with it.
I think so. Um, alright. So, Earthbound, Grand Prix Part 2. So you said it's 2 of 3?
Yeah, it's 2 of 6.
Oh, 2 of 6, sorry.
3 will be the first trade. So the next campaign will kind of also have the trade available. So it'll be even a little bigger. And yeah, Sorry, I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah.
It's all right. Um, yeah. So it's already funded, 463% of funding, 44 days to go. So there should be no problem with, it's not a question of is it going to fund, is it not going to fund. Um, if people back it, when do you anticipate delivery, more or less?
Yeah, delivery it'll be quick. It'll be like May, June at the latest. And because it's this one is all done, I'm actually lettering it now, and that's the last thing. What kind of lettering and polishing it? I want to try and maybe get it done, and maybe send it out to a few people while it's still funding, and maybe see if there's any like positive word of mouth can help sales or something like that.
Hmm, nice. Um, all right. Let me see. And oh, you mentioned yes, I forgot your boy Zach. What are you doing with him? I remember the one book you were doing with him, but what are you doing more or
Yeah, because the first book was 499, and that was kind of the launch of Narzac, which is like our
Mhm.
collaboration where we both kind of do a little bit of everything. But for we've done like 4 or 5 Narzac books, and then there's a couple more in the works. So it continues, which is nice. That's like a fun thing to keep going for sure. And I think for Zach, it's a little bit of an outlet for him to really be extra creative, extra potentially weird, but weird is not necessarily the best word. But we do sometimes think of it as like our Twilight Zone. A lot of the stories can be
Hmm,
Twilight Zone esque.
okay.
And the way Twilight Zone can have like, it can really be all over the place. It can be like kind of goofy sometimes, or a genre story in the middle of it, or something like that.
So what's the process of working with him like?
It's all via email, and it can be quick emails, like texts almost. And then, yeah, it's like brainstorming in that early email texting phase. Then he'll kind of send a loose outline. And then lately, this is kind of in general, yeah, kind of what we do. Then I'll kind of start thumbnailing it, and we kind of get placeholder dialogue that gets more and more. So almost like Marvel style, but the
Mhm.
dialogue kind of gets solidified. And then I kind of just go away and do everything, and then we come back and finish off the anything that might need to be messed with. And having the two eyes on it helps a lot, and is kind of a fun way to do it.
No, so it streamlines the process in terms of like, picking out things that might still need to be done or things that need to be fixed up a little bit.
Yeah, it's like once I become the go away and kind of become the artist, then he kind of becomes the editor. Um, And so
Hmm,
that's kind of like, and then we're both still kind of polishing the dialogue or whatever.
nice. So in this campaign, if there's anyone who's new to your books, where should they start? What tier, what perk or reward, if you want to call it?
Yeah,
Where should they start, do you think?
yeah. I would say get the Grand Prix 1 and 2, which is down a little bit. Yeah, it's like the cover
Ah,
series A or cover series B. Yeah, these two, because that'll give you the full Grand Prix story up until this point. Because Earthbound, it came first, but it functions as like a prequel as well. And I've gotten feedback from people who read it either way.
hmm,
And so that's the first thing. And then if you want to like jump in head first, then I would say there's a catch up tier to get the full first prequel story and the 2 Grand Prix, and that basically gives you everything. So that's good too. Those are the two options, but it's nice to know that they're fully like they're it's like a movie or whatever. It's not like they are like self-contained. So Grand Prix you can start from scratch with that one.
hmm. And so you said basically once a year it's coming out. When can people expect three? Will it be this year or 2025, do you think?
Yeah, it'll be like either later this year. The way my schedule goes, sometimes things get bumped back just because yeah, like which is fine. And I could try and launch two at the same time, but that's always a little bit of a sketchy thing. If you can do it, then that's great. But so if I bump it back, because I'm like, I got the Cerberus Part 2 with Monica's coming up, Hotel Story Part 2 with Jared is coming up as well. Maybe one other, a Narzak, and this. But it'll be done. The art will be done probably by late this year, and then right around then I'll launch another crowdfund to get to all the way to the first trade of this story, kind of part 3.
Okay. So you've got your own stuff, your stuff with Zach, your stuff with Monica, your stuff with Jared. How many for you, like what's the sweet spot in how many books a year you think you can put out?
Yeah, I mean, or even what I'm working on at any given
Mhm.
point, I'm a little bit over the sweet spot. Like it's constantly just accidentally.
Mhm.
And I'm like, if I could just cut back one or whatever. And I remember too, sometimes I'll like think back very fondly of the early days before crowdfunding, where all I was doing was drawing in my room with a dream or whatever. And by the time I kind of jumped in, Foreign Agent was done slash almost done, and Earthbound was done slash almost done. So I did a bunch of work on my own before things kind of started to take off. So that head start has helped me kind of keep the ball rolling as I go, which is nice. It helps me get the fast fulfillments and everything. And it is
Mhm.
like building the train tracks while you're on the train. And expanding into collaborations helps because it is like you're doing less work at that point. So you can do a little more if you're collaborating. But yeah, I try to get like, as far as what I'm crowdfunding, if I can do 3 crowdfunds a year, which is kind of a lot, but if I can do that, that always is pretty good.
And so for people who maybe want to get into the indie comics game and aren't there yet, can you tell people like how much work is it just to crowdfund these things? Because being on the other end, as a guy who's got a show, man, some people are just like really burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. And there is like blind spots. It's almost good if your first campaign is not a smashing success, so you can learn everything and kind of do it and grow from there. And that was like me. I was actually like that. Like my first campaign was actually a very first Earthbound floppy that was kind of pre CG, and that one just I was kind of begging friends and family to back it, and it raised 2,000, and I fulfilled
Mhm.
it. And I think I had like wrapped the floppies in bubble wrap in a weird way. I didn't even know about bagging and boarding. And people were getting the packages, being like, "What the hell is this?" Um, but yeah, so it is definitely a lot of work. One thing to keep in mind too is like it is a situation where the more that you do can kind of be the better. Like I was lucky that I wrote and drew because you keep more of the profits, and
Mhm.
there's less people that where things can go wrong and stuff. So it is good to try and develop both the skills. If you're a young gun, I would kind of do that. If not, it's fine too. And then you're trying to find a good teammate, and do it that way.
Hmm. How long would you say you're like out there repping each book? Because like I've had some people, I know a few people. I'll see them like once a year, and then they're like completely radio silent until like the next year when another project goes out. Is it like you do this project for a whole month and then you got a month off and then you got to go start doing the next one? Or
Yeah, it is a little bit like that. I do kind of cherish the in between, which will usually be like when you actually order the prints, it takes 2 weeks for them to get there, and then you have like a crazy fulfillment, and then like a week or two before you launch the next one. So that whole period, there's not much promotion. And I do kind of relax, and that might be like a month or something. But I have a one weekly show, and I'll usually keep my channel
Mhm.
kind of active, just streaming randomly. But then if I have a campaign, I do kind of try and do the tour, whatever I can find of like whoever's got a show. No matter how big or small, because the conversation is fun too, and you never know who you'll meet and network with, and the
Yeah.
chat and everything. So that's kind of I do try and do the tour, uh, which I'm doing now too for this one. But
Okay. Nice. Um, So if you had advice for anyone coming up, anyone who's watching this who's like, I really want to make comics, where would you advise them to start or at least not to go wrong at?
Yeah. One thing is like YouTube is better than college for art, which is weird. We're in a weird spot in
Yeah.
history. And so, yeah, don't go into massive debt. Just do YouTube. And then, as far as like writing and drawing, the best combining them is like how you get the best, the quickest in a funny way. Because if you sit and draw all day, you might never draw like a girl sitting on a couch, which is like the hardest thing to draw. So, and all of a sudden, if you're like writing, all of a sudden you have to draw like a guy going up a ladder, and you're like, or holding a lantern. You're like, I've never had to draw this before, and now you have to draw it. So just
Mhm.
the way you force yourself, and you'd be surprised how fast you learn and get better that way. I think there's a fun legend is like Jim Lee didn't he like talked his parents into postponing medical school for a
Yeah.
year, and he lived with them and he drew every day, and it took him, and he's like a maybe an exception or whatever, but exceptional. But it took him 1 year to kind of get so good that he was then a pro, and then he kept getting better. But you can do it faster than you think if you kind of do it smartly. And the best probably way is to like you know, actually combine words and drawings, actually be working on projects because that will force you to do stuff you'd never think of.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Todd McFarlane has a similar story, except it wasn't his parents. He had to convince his wife that, look, I need 1 year to just draw and get good.
Yeah,
And somehow she went for it.
yeah, that's cool.
Greatest wife ever. Um,
Yeah,
so,
there's a Mike Judge has a story like that too, kind of.
mhm.
He was trying to get into animation, but I think he had to keep working. But his story of breaking into animation is crazy and like super inspiring. But I think once he broke into animation, he eventually divorced his wife. I think I don't know the whole story. Not that that's good
That's
or bad, but
Yeah, that's like James Cameron. He was a truck driver and he convinced his wife in the 80s like, "Hey, I have to do this." And she was like, "Okay." And then, he divorced her
yeah,
pretty much right away too. And
yeah.
Ang Lee, I believe, did not divorce his wife, but somehow as like a middle-aged guy, he convinced his wife like, I have to move from Taiwan and
Oh
make
yeah,
movies."
yeah. Points for that. Anytime they stay together, it's nice, wholesome.
Definitely. Um all right. So, in addition to your own work, whose work are you excited about? Whether it's indie or it's more of a mainstream publisher, whose stuff are you excited about seeing?
Yeah. Uh, there's a few collaborators that I just definitely love working with. Jared is one. He does solo stuff too that I love. Brendan Swan is kind of in and around. He does Disintegration Street,
Hmm.
which I really loved. And I hired Brendan to write something for me, and he turned in a script. I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. So I'm sitting right now on an awesome script from Brendan Swan, but that's another one where I don't have the time or money for it yet. So it's kind of just sitting there, which is a bummer. But I love that I have it, and so I always keep an eye out for whatever he's doing. So those two always, Jared and Brendan, I like will always just really excited about what they might be up to. And then on top of that, kind of in the more mainstream is I still follow and read everything Mark Millar does.
Hmm.
Partly there is because I have an extra excitement because he and I are sort of pen pals, but just like once a year, I might email him and he'll email me back. But we kind of got in touch, I think through your boy Zach's channel. He had like actually done a review of Foreign Agent where he said it was good. Mark Millar kind of keeps tabs on the whole landscape of the industry. So he noticed that, followed me on Twitter, and I DM'd him. I'm like, "Did you follow me because of your boy Zach's review?" And he goes, "Absolutely. I've been following your work for a while. I think you're great." Da, 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 da. I was like, "No way. This is amazing." So then I'm like, I gotta get more into Mark Millar because I'd read a fair amount, but I hadn't like done deep dive. So I've been
Hmm.
doing that literally for the past 2 years. It's very inspiring. He is like very good, obviously. It makes sense that he would be, but yeah.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Um, All right. Let's go back here. Um, so anything else we should know about the campaign? And for anyone who's watching, it is pinned at the top of the chat, and there is a link to the Fund My Comic down in the description to the video. So if you're wondering where to get it, go to one of those two.
Nice. I got one backer as we're talking, so whoever that was, thank you. And
Yes.
thanks, John. Yeah, that's sweet. Yeah, it continues to tick up, which is great. The kind of loose goal is in my head is 16K. That's what the last one did. So you always want it to track, about like that to keep the wheels on the bus. And I feel like we'll get close to that, if not hit it or surpass it. So yeah, life is good for now. Just continuing to live the dream a little bit. And yeah, this comic, it's done, which is awesome. So that's about it.
Awesome. Well, I know you are a busy man, and really appreciate you coming by, and hopefully you'll come back again.
Definitely.
So yeah, everyone go check out Earthbound. You can get parts 1 and 2 on this Fund My Comic, and keep an eye out for the next one coming out later this year, I guess, or early next year.
Yeah. Yeah, probably the very next campaign I do, I think will be Cerberus Part 2, or possibly Weird Mystery Project that I'm dabbling in right now.
Oh, sounds good.
Mhm.
All right. And so, everyone, tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern, I will have the Basic Expert, where we will be talking about old school gaming, and mystery guest maybe later this week. We'll see.
Cool.
So, thanks a lot for coming, everyone. And we'll see you back soon.
Thanks for having me.